So I'm Kelly Morris, and I worked for the Orange County Planning Department since 2002, worked on several different watershed management plans in all kinds of scales, the Hudson River Watershed being the first one that our department had worked on, and that involves the state of New Jersey because the Hudson River starts in New Jersey and ends up joining the Rondout and entering the Hudson River near Kingston, New York. And then also working on a watershed plan for the Quassaick Creek Watershed, Monhegan being the most recent watershed, which is also a tributary of the Wallkill. So as opposed to the upper Hudson watershed, which is very large, this one is 56 square miles, and it's a tidal in its lower portion of the Quassaick Creek, which forms the border of the city of Newburgh and the town of New Windsor in Orange County, but its headwaters are up in the town of Plattekill, which is in Ulster County. So I'm going to start first and just describe the planning process because I was the project manager for the watershed plan. But then John Gebhards has been the one who was actually my first boss when I moved here to Orange County from South Carolina, as when I worked for the Orange County Land Trust, and he was the executive director, but now he's a volunteer chair of the Quassaick Creek Watershed Alliance, which has done some amazing things, which we're going to highlight today. So next slide. Emily, and I apologize for having to say this next slide every now and then because I'm having issues with my iMac and doing the screen sharing. So this is the cover of our Quassaick Creek Watershed Management Plan. The Orange County Planning Department got a grant from the Department of State to do a watershed management plan. And I think you all have heard from, if you tuned in yesterday, Kate Hogle from the Department of State outlined their planning process and the components that go into each watershed plan, which is very formulaic and very helpful, which goes from a vision statement, getting an advisory committee together that goes over that vision statement, then develops goals and then objectives and the watershed characterization and several other components that I don't need to belabor because she went over them in very great detail, and her presentation is available. So next slide. So this is the watershed fully. So you see it includes Ulster County and Orange County, towns of Plattekill, a little bit of western Marlborough County, the town of New Windsor, the town of Newburgh, and a little bit of the town of Montgomery, and then a decent portion of the city of Newburgh. So we divided, one of the first steps that we took was divide into sub-watersheds just to characterize them each individually because they are unique systems. It includes the major water bodies are, in terms of lakes at least, are Orange Lake, Chadwick Lake, which is a backup water supply for the town of New Windsor, which currently I believe is feeding off the Catskill Aqueduct as their primary water source. And then the city of Newburgh's two surface water supplies being Lake Washington and Browns Pond, which the city is now using Browns Pond. I think maybe most of you have probably heard about the PFOS issues that have happened and contaminated Lake Washington, which initially was or has been for a while the city of Newburgh's primary water supply, but because of firefighting foams that were used at the Stewart Airport Air National Guard location, it's contaminated groundwater and surface water. So Lake Washington is no longer, or currently not, a viable source of drinking water for the city of Newburgh. So they've kind of had to figure out what they're going to do. And they were on the Catskill Aqueduct, but now there's a shutdown, and so they're on Browns Pond. So those issues with the PFAS is the term used for the conglomerate of the various perfluorinated compounds, was unknown at the time of the writing of this plan. So one thing that we're going to touch on during the presentation is what updates need to be made to this plan, which was finalized in 2014. So we're 7 years out, soon to be 8 years out, and we're looking to do some updates to this plan, which was very comprehensive. It's over 200 pages long. It's available on the Orange County Water Authority's website, which was one of our in-kind sources of advice and funding for this plan, and has been a huge supporter of various watershed planning initiatives throughout Orange County. So going on to the reasons, next slide, the reasons for the plan. The Quassaick Creek is listed, the lower and minor tributaries, as having minor impacts from nutrients and unknown toxicity. Sources being from combined sewer overflow, which is how the city of Newburgh and many other cities along the Hudson River and throughout the country and throughout our region, that's how their sewer system is managed, is combined sewer, which means that untreated sewage is released into the Hudson River through their sewage system, and then urban and stormwater runoff. And there was a group which John Gebhards and others had started to convene, discussing the need for stream restoration, stream stewardship in general, cleanups. There's garbage dumps, as you'll see throughout any sort of stream corridor, and the need for bank stabilization, and then also recreational access. So one of the first things that we did once we had all of our paperwork done with the Department of State and the county was to form an advisory committee. So this is a project of the Orange County Planning Department, but the Orange County Water Authority was key. And you can see the list of other advisory committee members. We did mailings to landowners that were along the creek and its important tributaries and some of the lakes that are within the watershed. Ulster County Planning Department was also a really good, strong partner throughout the whole process. Also, Orange County Soil and Water Conservation District was great at doing a lot of on the ground research, especially into our stormwater detention ponds and the lack of maintenance thereof, which there is a link on the Orange County Water Authority website. If you go to the Quassaick Creek page, there's an interactive map of where all of the stormwater detention ponds are located within the watershed, and there are attributes for each of them. And the plan has a section, a chapter on the specifics as to each pond and what the needs are. But I think that's something that those of you who are paying attention to stormwater detention ponds or just stormwater management in general will find that these stormwater detention ponds are not being maintained in the fashion that they were designed to be. And so that's an issue. There's debris, there are the outfall structures that are compromised, they're invasive species, and they're generally just ignored in many, and I would say most situations, at least what we found in our watershed. So that's something that we've reached out to the municipalities about, and their code enforcement officers are often the ones that are charged with enforcing those, but it seems to be a low priority. So just a quick plug about a dialogue that's been going on for a while in the region and the state about the need to try to get these systems more functional. So, but we also, in the advisory committee, there's Winona Lake has a homeowners association and a dam that's been breached and has caused significant stream bank erosion. So we're in conversations with them. Orange Lake has harmful algal blooms that have been documented several years. And luckily they're participating in the statewide stream monitoring or lake monitoring program, the CSLAP program. So that's an issue, and there's some nutrients that are still being researched, what the inputs are coming from that are feeding into Orange Lake. And the Orange County Land Trust, of course, is always a good partner on land conservation. So we've looked at conservation opportunities within, especially the drinking water supplies. The Orange County Planning Department received a grant to, a WQIP grant to prioritize stormwater management within the Washington Lake and Silver Stream reservoirs, which is also called Browns Pond, which is a little confusing since there's another Browns Pond in Orange County. And so hopefully that was a over $2 million grant, and that should be getting underway sometime this year, if not next year. And there should be some more land preservation and stormwater protection. And then the Department of Health was a great partner in terms of just drinking water supply protection. So, and of course, always the Hudson River Estuary Program, very strong supporter, and the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. So, all right, next slide. Okay, so I went over most of the reasons for the watershed plan, and this slide is just showing, this is from the DEC Environmental Resource Mapper that shows the locations for brownfields cleanup, environmental restoration, Superfund sites, and voluntary cleanup sites. But seeing as how the watershed includes the very urbanized city of Newburgh, there are, of course, a lot of sites that are in of remediation. There's some, DuPont was there. There are major industries in the city of Newburgh, and especially along the lower stretch of the Quassaick Creek, as I said, which forms the border of the city of Newburgh and the town of New Windsor. There were over 100 industries that have been built and were developed and changed hands along the way, and cleanup is a constant need there. So there's been some brownfields work that's been done there, but there's still a need for much more, definitely. So moving on then, so as stated yesterday by Kate Hogle, the watershed planning process involves the creation of a vision statement. So what we developed once we convened our advisory committee is this vision statement. And I will just kind of highlight a couple things. And again, this is part of the watershed plan that you can find online. And also the Hudson River Watershed Alliance is saving all of these presentations, so you can go back and read. I don't want to be the person who just, keeps reading lots of text. But anyway, our vision was to try to make the creek more healthy by improving water quality, making sure that our water supplies are safeguarded. Again, this is before we knew about the PFOS issue. Enhancing our ecological processes and protecting wildlife to make a more resilient watershed. And so we will do that by identifying and increasing awareness of local water resource issues through strategic outreach and education, and by recognizing water-related opportunities and vulnerabilities within the watershed. And most important, perhaps one of the most important things is encouraging intermunicipal collaboration, which has been an ongoing struggle because there are just issues with the city of Newburgh, and I'm sure most of you know that cities and villages which rely on their water supply, if it's usually outside of their municipality and therefore outside of their jurisdiction. And there are watershed rules and regulations which are in place, but they're usually very decades old and not typically recognized or enforced. And so these more urban environments are left to the zoning jurisdiction of the towns that are outside of their territory. And so that has been a major issue within this watershed and many other watersheds in general in New York State. So that's something that's an ongoing conversation that we're still looking to try to get rectified and figure out a better way to get those water resources protected. When the municipality wants to zone it, the watershed for a drinking water supply for the city wants to zone it for industrial use and doesn't want to have buffers around that water supply or around that wellhead. That's ongoing conversations. So, but there have been some positive conversations that have come out of those discussions. So, but in general, we want this watershed to be sustainable and, you know, keep that water flowing and keep the herring and eel populations healthy and surviving. So next slide. So once the vision was established, there were 5 goals that were developed for the watershed, and water quality, drinking water sources, and that water quantity is adequately managed, natural watershed functions, ecological processes should be improved and enhanced, intermunicipal implementation, increase awareness, and create a plan that's resilient to current and future weather conditions. So that's one thing that John might touch on, is the need for an augmentation to our plan to include a climate change study that was done for Orange County in cooperation with SUNY New Paltz. There were 3 professors that helped to develop this Orange County climate change study. And so there's a lot, and it was based on watersheds. And so there's a lot from the Quassaick plan that we could use to develop a supplement or an addendum to this plan. So we're looking to hopefully do that sometime in the next year or so. And then from there, and we did the watershed characterization and assessment, lots of detail. It must be 70 something pages, very informative in terms of, you know, the various water bodies and tributaries that all feed into this Quassaick Creek Watershed Plan. And after monthly meetings that we had for about 2 years, we had budgeted or allocated about 18 months for this project. We're lucky to get an extension from Department of State just because we delved into this so much and there was so much interest from various parties. So this project ended up being 2 years instead of 18 months. But we tried to make it as inclusive as possible and included public notices, and, you know, got a lot of people we hadn't met before that are now members of the Quassaick Creek Watershed Alliance and are very valuable members with their all various aspects of knowledge. So but with a plan, it's your recommendations that end up being the meat of the project. The plan itself, it's a wealth of knowledge that is great for reference and future grant applications and school projects. We've had high school students involved and college students involved in some of the implementation of this plan. But the recommendations, we have probably about 40 pages where we outline the various recommendations, and they're organized by the goals and the objectives. And so they include descriptions of why this was recommended, what the benefits are, and then what's been done so far. But then this table, which is just a quick little snapshot, and there's an appendix to the plan that includes the whole spreadsheet. But I found it was interesting how well this aligned with Kate Hogel's elaboration of what they recommend within the watershed plans. So in terms of the project cost, how far out this should be implemented, if it's just 1 year plus immediately, 6 years, 2 to 5 years, and the various considerations in terms of site access and what regulatory steps are needed, and et cetera. And then one thing that was important was that we identified, and actually next slide, you can see there's another table that just shows it in a little more detail. But on the far right hand are the priority actions. There's a star for those. And that was one thing that we found really important, is to identify 10 priority actions. And maybe 10 is an arbitrary number, but we ended up all agreeing in our advisory committee meetings on the 10 that we thought were most important. So those are that star is just to help identify them. So next slide shows this is just one of them. The lower Quassaick, which has gotten a lot of traction recently, thanks to a grant that was received in Scenic Hudson, and the city of Newburgh are prioritizing and working on this now. There's going to be RFP going out soon, but the 10 priority actions, I'll just try to describe quickly in a little bit of detail. Crystal Lake is at the base of Snake Hill, which is on the border of the city of Newburgh and the town of New Windsor. And it's just an amazing location. So you go from the urban streets of Newburgh and you walk into Crystal Lake, and it's gorgeous. And there's a lot of action. There are raised beds, and Scenic Hudson's doing a lot there. And then you hike up to the top of Snake Hill and you have the iconic view of the Hudson Highlands with Storm King Mountain and the Highlands, Mount Beacon on the other side of the river. And it's just breathtaking. And it's a community asset that hasn't been used for years, but now is getting a lot of traction. And so there's a lot of momentum to connect that area through Muchados Lake and then down through the lower Quassaick and then up the Hudson River over to the Trail of Two Cities, as they call the Newburgh Beacon Bridge, which has a pedestrian trail that's been designated as a greenway trail. So that's, this is called, I think Peter Smith, who's been one of the primary drivers of work along the Quassaick Creek, calls this Newburgh's other waterfront, because the city of Newburgh's waterfront is where all the restaurants and all the nightlife is, but this is like the other waterfront. It's the creek, and it's got a greenway around it, and we just need to do some cleanups and environmental remediation work. But on the bottom right is a view from just Google Earth, I think, that shows the greenway that's already along the creek. So it could be a great natural attraction for the city and the town of New Windsor. We also did the code audit of the town of New Windsor, all municipalities that were in the watershed, and recommended improvements and some overlay district language, etc. Muchachos Lake is within the city of Newburgh, and there's already been some work that's been going on there, which John, I think, will cover. Orange Lake, I've partially covered, but it's a recreational lake. It's not a water supply, but it's got the harmful algal blooms. They've got issues with invasive species. So Eurasian milfoil being the main one. So we're continuing to work with them. Education, watershed awareness. There is a need, especially around Orange Lake, actually, and this is probably a primary source of nutrients, is septic management of older homes, and specifically, so getting the word out about, you know, where you when you flush the toilet, where it goes, and it's in your backyard at sometimes, and there's a huge need for new homeowners especially to understand better how their wastewater is managed. Source water protection, stream monitoring, which is continuing to happen, and then the Winona Lake dam replacement, which is an expensive project but is still needing to happen. So next slide is plan successes. So John, if you want to take it from here. I don't know, John, can you unmute yourself and do?
There, it did.
Oh, okay.
Hello, everybody. John Gebhards from the Quassaick Creek Watershed Alliance. And this plan has been a tremendous guide for us. We don't let it collect dust on the shelf. We have had more than 25 actions based on, or actions based on at least 25 of the 50 recommendations in the plan. And we've focused on these 10 priority areas predominantly. They have allowed us to do specific work around some of the lakes, and in one specific instance that Kelly was talking about, Crystal Lake, we removed in 3 different workshop times 9 tons of trash from that area and 100 tires. And since then, it has been turned into a lovely community asset with Scenic Hudson creating parking and a trail up Snake Hill. And the gardens have been put in place there by another local not-for-profit. So those types of plans, and I don't have time to go into all the different priority actions, but those are the types of things that we've used. The other area which we've really focused strongly on have been doing the sampling in the streams. We've had our wave sampling and macroinvertebrate sampling. We had a trial on leaf packs, which we learned some lessons about making certain that they, when the water drops, that they stay in the water. We've worked with the Mount St. Mary's College students for sampling in the streams. A very interesting sampling project was doing a baseline on microplastics in the Quassaick Creek with Marist College. We have worked with the Orange Lake Homeowners Association in terms of trying to identify the nutrients that are causing the harmful algae blooms And that project is leading us to some interesting conclusions, which we're sharing with the DEC. And we have a chloride sampling that we started last year to do baseline on what road salts are doing to our streams. So these types of things keep us busy with, we have normally about 50 to 70 volunteers during the year working on the different projects. And oh yes, I must mention, even though we've had a hiatus on the eel counting, that's been one of our most popular sampling, documenting items. And we've had, like I say, about 70 volunteers annually working with us. Couple of quick lessons learned. We don't feel like we have engaged enough with municipal officials. We tried, but there is still a lacking of connect there in certain situations where we report MS4 activities to them, but it doesn't seem to have much meaning. We just need more to get on board more with the municipal officials. And also any infrastructure that we put in, whether it's kiosks, trails, trees for tribs or whatever, definitely need to have a maintenance program to follow up. Opportunities coming, and I see that the program that Maureen Gallagher and Kristen Martinez presented on the drinking water source protection is something we all should grab a hold of and get in our plans. And the other item is climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. Find out what you can best do in your area on that and incorporate it in your plans. So to keep on schedule here, I just want to again thank all of the many volunteers we've had that have made our actions possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, John and Kelly, for presenting on the Quassaick Creek Management Plan and the many projects that the Quassaick Creek Watershed Alliance is working on. I think it's really helpful to hear, we've heard from Beth about working with soil and water conservation districts at the county scale and municipalities, and then thinking about how a smaller scale watershed plan can work with a watershed group and volunteers and get momentum on some of these projects with other partners as well. So if there are questions for our presenters, please go ahead and put those into the chat. Oh, I see one here. Okay. Do you see a way to, this is about the rules and regulations, watershed rules and regulations. Do you see a way to update and enforce the watershed rules and regulations that reach outside of boundaries, such as New York City Department of Environmental Protection with their watersheds? And I have an answer, but I'd like to pitch it to the presenters first. Okay, I'll take that one, no problem. So in terms of updating watershed rules and regulations, there's been a lot of traction around Owasco Lake and their watershed rules and regulations. That's in the Finger Lakes. So many of us are watching to see how that goes and if Department of Health will be moving forward with those watershed rules and regulations. I think that's going to be a really great case study to watch. And if that goes through, it may open up the door for more municipalities to look at protecting their drinking water sources through the watershed rules and regulations as a policy mechanism.
Right. Yeah, this has been as I said before, it's a source of discussion with Riverkeeper, with Hudson River Estuary Program, with DEC, Department of Health at the state level and the county levels. But there seems to be an unspoken moratorium about watershed rules and regulations, and there haven't been any updated very recently, even though some municipalities have tried to. So it's something at the state level that needs to happen. The county has been trying to help, in Orange County at least, but I know with New York City DEP, it was hugely litigious. It was expensive, and they've been able to do a very successful job, but they also were able to acquire a lot of property, which is not something that our local municipalities can afford. So yeah, that's interesting to hear about this lake that Emily mentioned. And yeah, it's got to get solved at some point soon. I don't know if Dan Shapley's on this webinar or not, but I know he's been diligently working on that for a while via, Riverkeeper.
Another question that came in, what research has been done to remediate the areas that have been identified with contamination along the lower creek and watershed in the Quassaick, both in terms of the extent of contamination and potential funding sources to remediate?
Excuse me. Yeah, Orange County, we got a phase 1 and a phase 2 done, environmental research done for the county-owned property, which is the last industry that was on there was the diamond candle factory, and we were able to get some EPA assistance and did the phase 1 and phase 2. We didn't have to pay for that, and then we applied for a grant to do an actual remediation and cleanup, but it's an incredibly competitive process. It's a national process with limited funding by the EPA in terms of national needs, and we didn't get it, and now we have to redo the phase 2 because then that it expires apparently, which I didn't know, but which is interesting. So we've looked at doing environmental remediation, but the city of Newburgh has done a decent amount of remediation just through their own capital budget on their side of the creek. So it's ongoing. Yeah. But brownfields is definitely a great program if you can acquire the funding.
In working on the watershed management plan, what was your process to reach out to underrepresented communities and doing some community engagement?
We had posters. In retrospect, I'm wishing that we would have done bilingual website, because there's a huge Hispanic population within the city of Newburgh and the surrounding area. And with actually throughout the watershed, town of Plattekill included. But we had posters up in libraries and community centers for the public meetings, and with email addresses. We had QR codes if people had, that technology on their phone. And so we got a decent amount of community engagement that we were very happy and surprised. So, but we didn't have the manpower or the dollars to go door to door or like walk the streets. But yeah, we did the best we could with social media and with just, really nice posters and stuff that were compelling and tried to get the attention of, the citizens of the area.
Great, thank you. I think that's been a constant theme throughout a lot of these talks, is how involved that community engagement process can be, and the need to really budget and put time and effort into that at the start, and looking back, if there's some lessons learned and opportunities. But we heard some really exciting opportunities from our youth on Monday's session. So if you missed that, highly recommend that you go back and watch that session. So we've also got a couple comments in the chat saying that this Quassaick plan is an inspiration for the region. I'm always so thrilled to learn that the Quassaick Creek Watershed Alliance creates an annual work plan based on the 52 actions, not only focusing on the 10, but keeping those in rotation and making sure that the plan is really used and considered, and if not updated in the document version, really updated in its implementation. So kudos to the whole Quassaick Creek Watershed Alliance and team for continuing to move that forward.